Blood pooled beneath the German shepherd's powerful frame as he stood, legs trembling but stance unwavering, over the small boy. The dog's once glossy coat now matted with crimson where strangers' blows had landed. Across Riverdale's usually peaceful Main Street, voices crescendoed into a hysteric chorus. "Get that vicious dog away from the child!" A woman screamed, clutching her phone with white knuckles, already capturing what would become tomorrow's viral outrage. A man wielding a broken tree branch advanced. "Someone call animal control, it's gone rabid." The dog Shadow flinched as another blow struck his flank. Yet he remained positioned between the sobbing 4-year-old and the street. His teeth weren't bared at the boy. His eyes weren't fixed on the child. Nobody saw the truck until it was too late, nobody except Shadow. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Riverdale wasn't always afraid of dogs. Before the Miller boy got mauled last spring, folks used to smile at the sight of Frank Reynolds walking his German Shepherd down Main Street. But fear changes a town, and memories in Riverdale had grown selective. Frank, at 68, carried himself with the straight-backed posture that 30 years in the military instills in a man. The lines etched around his eyes told stories of Vietnam, of losing his son Michael to a drunk driver in '92, and of the nightmares that still woke him sweating most nights. Shadow was his 4th service dog, but the first he'd trained himself. The bond between them ran deeper than most people could understand. "That dog's got a 6th sense," Frank would tell anyone willing to listen at Earl's Diner. "Knows when I'm having a bad day before I do." What he didn't mention was how he'd rescued Shadow from a shelter that had labeled him too intense for adoption, or how they'd healed each other's broken parts over the past 3 years. 2 blocks from Frank's modest bungalow on Elm Street lived Jessica Bennett and her son Mason. New to town, Jessica had moved to Riverdale 6 months ago when the divorce finalized and city rent became impossible on a waitress's salary. She worked doubles at the Highway 16 diner and weekend shifts at Cooper's Pharmacy, leaving precious little time to watch her energetic 4-year-old. Mason had his father's golden curls and his mother's curious nature, a combination that kept Jessica constantly vigilant when she wasn't relying on neighbors to help with childcare. "He's quick as lightning," she'd warned Mrs. Abernathy next door. "Turns your back for 1 second, and he's halfway down the street." Mason loved trucks, dinosaurs, and every dog he'd ever met, especially the big police dog he sometimes saw on his way to preschool. Shadow, for his part, always watched the small human with the attentive gaze he reserved for things Frank taught him to protect. That's how life in Riverdale flowed until that Tuesday in July compartmentalized, cautious, and quietly judgmental. The town council had just passed Ordinance 24B, requiring all dogs over 40 pounds to be leashed in public spaces, with the park on Maple Street being the sole exception. It was a town holding its breath, waiting for the next thing to fear. The 3rd Tuesday in July arrived with the kind of heat that made the asphalt shimmer and dogs seek shade. Frank rose at 6, same as always, and made his coffee black, same as always. Shadow padded around the kitchen, nails clicking on linoleum, waiting for the routine they both cherished. "What do you say we hit the park early? Boy, beat this heat." Frank scratched behind Shadow's ears, earning that head tilt dogs give when they're processing human words they recognize. The German Shepherd's tail swished across the floor in anticipation. By 7:30, they were walking the 3 blocks to Maple Street Park, the one place in Riverdale where Shadow could legally be off-leash. Frank's knee was acting up again, too many jumps from helicopters in another lifetime, but he refused to use a cane. Shadow matched his pace, occasionally glancing up as if checking on his human. Morning. Frank. Shadow. Edith Walters, 84 and still tending her front garden daily, waved from across the street. You boys enjoying the cool morning while it lasts? That we are. Edith, you stay hydrated now. Supposed to hit 95 by noon. Frank tipped his Veterans Affairs cap. The gesture as automatic as breathing. At the park. Frank unclipped Shadow's leash and watched as the shepherd made his usual perimeter check, not running wild like younger dogs, but patrolling with purpose. 3 years of training had embedded routines deep in Shadow's behavior. First the perimeter, then back to Frank, then a careful exploration of anything new in their environment. Good boy, Frank murmured, lowering himself onto their usual bench, the one with a view of both the playground and the duck pond. You keep an eye out. Across town, Jessica Bennett was already 20 minutes behind schedule. Her alarm hadn't gone off. Mason had spilled orange juice across the kitchen floor, and Mrs. Abernathy had called to say she had a doctor's appointment and couldn't watch him until noon. Sweetie, please put your shoes on. Mommy's got to drop you at Miss Caroline's for the morning. Jessica tucked her waitress uniform into her bag. Her shift started at 8, and Caroline Peterson had agreed to watch Mason as a last-minute favor. Don't want to go to Miss Caroline's. She doesn't have toys. Mason's bottom lip jutted out in the beginning of a tantrum Jessica didn't have time for. She has a TV and those cookies you like. It's just for a few hours. I promise. Jessica knelt to his level, brushing blonde curls from his forehead. And if you're good, maybe we can stop for ice cream after I pick you up. The mention of ice cream did what reasoning couldn't. 10 minutes later, Jessica was hurrying down Sycamore Lane, gripping Mason's hand perhaps too tightly as they power-walked 3 blocks to Caroline's small yellow house. Thanks again, Caroline. I owe you big time. Jessica handed over Mason's backpack containing snacks, his favorite dinosaur book, and a change of clothes. I'll be back by 1 at the latest. Caroline Peterson, a retired school teacher with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses perpetually perched on her head, waved away Jessica's thanks. It's no trouble at all. We'll be just fine, won't we? Mason? Mason nodded without enthusiasm, already eyeing the cookie jar on Caroline's counter. Be good, buddy. Love you. Jessica kissed the top of his head and was out the door, already dialing her manager to say she'd be a few minutes late. Bill Henderson had been driving delivery trucks for Riverdale Supply Co. for 22 years without incident. His safety record was impeccable, his knowledge of the town's streets unmatched. But today, his mind wasn't on his route. His phone buzzed again as he turned onto Maple Street. His daughter, Emily, 16, and recovering from appendix surgery at Riverdale General, was texting updates about her pain levels. The hospital had called at dawn. Her fever had spiked overnight. Bill had wanted to stay, but deliveries wouldn't make themselves, and sick time was scarce since the company changed ownership. Just one quick check, Bill muttered, glancing down at his phone while approaching the 4-way stop near the park entrance. The message preview showed Dad, pain worse, nurse says. His thumb hovered over the unlock button. At 11:15, Caroline Peterson's landline rang. Her sister in Thornfield had fallen and needed someone to drive her to urgent care. It'll just be for an hour. Mason? Caroline knelt to the boy's level. "Mrs. Abernathy will be home by then, and I'll take you straight to her house. You just keep watching your dinosaur show." "Okay." Mason nodded, eyes fixed on the television where animated dinosaurs roamed prehistoric landscapes. Caroline hesitated, then decided a few minutes alone wouldn't hurt. She'd be back before he knew it. "Don't answer the door. Don't touch the stove. I'll be right back." She grabbed her purse and car keys. Decision made. The door clicked shut behind her. For 10 minutes, Mason sat transfixed by velociraptors. Then a familiar jingle floated through the open window, the ice cream truck making its Tuesday rounds. The promise of ice cream from earlier resurfaced in Mason's 4-year-old mind. The truck's music grew louder, then began to fade. Acting on impulse, Mason slid from the couch and went to the window. The colorful truck was turning the corner, heading toward the park. Without a second thought, Mason pushed open the screen door and stepped outside. Ice cream trucks were worth chasing in Maple Street Park. Frank had dozed off on the bench, lulled by the summer heat and the peaceful surroundings. Shadow lay at his feet, alert despite the relaxed posture. The German shepherd's ears twitched at each new sound, birds taking flight, children arriving at the playground, the distant melody of an ice cream truck. Then something changed. Shadow's head lifted, eyes focusing on the street beyond the park's entrance. His body tensed, a low whine building in his throat. Frank stirred. "What is it, boy?" Shadow was already rising, attention locked on something Frank couldn't yet see. Without warning, the dog bolted, moving with a speed and purpose that Frank recognized from training exercises. "Shadow, heel!" Frank called, struggling to his feet as his dog sprinted toward the park exit. For the first time in 3 years, Shadow ignored the command. Mason had followed the ice cream truck's music to the corner of Maple and Birch, where the road widened and traffic picked up near the park. The truck had stopped across the street, and a small line of children with parents was already forming. To Mason's 4-year-old logic, the solution was simple: cross the street, get ice cream, return before Miss Caroline noticed. He clutched his dinosaur figure tightly and stepped off the curb. Bill Henderson glanced up from his phone just as he accelerated from the stop sign. His daughter's fever had hit 103, and the nurse was suggesting they might need to change her antibiotics. His delivery was already behind schedule. The momentary distraction was all it took. Frank watched in horror as Shadow raced toward the street, toward a small blond boy stepping directly into the path of an oncoming delivery truck. His Vietnam-trained mind calculated distances and realized no human could reach the child in time. "No," Frank shouted, but his voice was lost in the sudden squeal of brakes. Shadow reached Mason in a blur of motion, his 80-pound frame colliding with the boy's small body, powerful jaws clamping not on flesh but on the back of Mason's t-shirt. With a violent jerk, the German shepherd pulled the child backward as the truck's front bumper missed them by inches. The force sent both dog and boy tumbling onto the grass at the edge of the park. Mason landed with a startled cry, his dinosaur toy flying from his hand. Shadow immediately positioned himself between the boy and the street, hackles raised, body tense. The first witness, a young mother pushing a stroller, saw only the last part, a large German shepherd knocking down a small child. Her scream cut through the morning air. "Oh my God, that dog attacked that little boy!" Shadow stood over Mason, his muscular body trembling not from fear but from the surge of adrenaline that had propelled him across the park. The German shepherd's eyes remained fixed on the truck, that had skidded to a halt 20 feet away, as if assessing whether the threat had truly passed. Mason lay on the grass, momentarily stunned, his dinosaur toy forgotten beside him. "Someone help that dog attacked a child." The young mother's voice carried across the park, drawing immediate attention from other bystanders. A construction worker on his lunch break jumped up from a nearby bench. Two teenagers lowered their phones and stared. A retired couple walking their poodle froze mid-step. "Get away from him," shouted a man in a business suit, rushing toward the scene. He grabbed a fallen branch from beneath a maple tree, wielding it like a baseball bat as he approached. Shadow's ears flattened against his skull, but he didn't move from his protective stance over Mason. The boy had started to cry now, more from shock than pain, reaching his small hands toward the dog as if seeking comfort rather than escape. "Doggy," he whimpered, but no one was listening to him. "That's Frank Reynolds' dog." Someone in the gathering crowd called out. "That thing's a military dog. It could kill that kid." The businessman swung his branch, striking Shadow's shoulder with enough force to splinter the wood. The shepherd flinched but stood his ground. A low growl rumbling in his chest, not directed at Mason but at the approaching adults. Frank was pushing through the crowd now, his bad knee screaming in protest as he tried to run. "Stop! Don't hurt him! He saved that boy!" But his voice was drowned out by the collective panic. A woman had picked up a rock. The construction worker had removed his belt and was approaching from the other side. In their eyes, they were witnessing a vicious animal attacking a helpless child. Their response was instinctual, protective. "Get back!" the construction worker shouted, swinging his belt at Shadow. The leather caught Shadow across his muzzle with a sharp crack. Blood welled from the cut, dripping onto Mason's shirt. Still, the dog didn't bite, didn't flee. His training held firm, protect at all costs. "Please, stop!" Frank finally broke through the circle of onlookers, his face flushed with exertion and fear. "He's not attacking. He pulled that boy from in front of a truck." Bill Henderson sat frozen behind the wheel of his delivery truck, his phone forgotten in his lap as he watched the scene unfold. His hands shook as he realized how close he'd come to hitting the child. When he finally stepped down from the cab, his legs nearly buckled beneath him. "The old man's right," Bill called out, his voice thin with shock. "The kid was in the street. The dog pulled him back." But the momentum of the crowd's reaction wasn't easily reversed. The businessman landed another blow with what remained of his branch, this time across Shadow's back. The shepherd yelped, but still maintained his position over Mason. "He's protecting him, you idiots!" Frank shouted, pushing the businessman back with surprising strength for his age. "Look at how he's standing. Look at his body language." For a brief moment, the attacks paused as uncertainty rippled through the crowd. Mason had managed to sit up now, and rather than trying to escape, he had wrapped his arms around Shadow's neck, his tears soaking into the dog's fur. "My doggy," the boy sobbed, holding tight to his protector. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the tension as both police and an ambulance responded to multiple 911 calls about a dog attack. Officer James Wilson was first on the scene, a 20-year veteran of Riverdale's small police force who had known Frank since high school. "Everybody back up," Wilson commanded, his hand resting cautiously on his holster as he assessed the situation. "Frank, call off your dog." "He's not attacking, James. He saved this boy from being hit by that truck." Frank pointed toward Bill's vehicle, still stopped at an angle in the middle of the street. "Shadow pulled him out of the way just in time." The paramedics waited at the edge of the crowd, unwilling to approach while Shadow remained over Mason. Blood from the dog's injuries had smeared onto the boy's clothes, making it impossible to tell at a glance whose blood it was or how badly either was hurt. "I need to check the child," a female paramedic called out. "Can someone control that dog?" Frank limped forward slowly, his voice dropping to the calm, firm tone he used in training. "Shadow, release watch. Come." The German shepherd's ears twitched at the familiar command. After a moment's hesitation, he backed away from Mason, allowing the paramedics to approach. Blood dripped from multiple wounds where he'd been struck his shoulder, muzzle, and a particularly nasty gash along his rib cage. "Jesus, Frank, your dog's hurt bad," Officer Wilson said, surveying the damage as Shadow limped to Frank's side. "So would you be if you'd been beaten with sticks and belts for saving a life," Frank replied bitterly, kneeling to examine Shadow's injuries despite his own pain. The paramedics had reached Mason now, checking him for injuries while he continued asking for the good doggy between sobs. Besides scrapes on his elbows and knees from when Shadow had pulled him from the street, the boy appeared unharmed. "Where's this child's parents?" Officer Wilson asked, looking around the crowd. "I don't know," said the young mother who'd first raised the alarm. "He was alone when the dog grabbed him." A second police car arrived, and with it came Animal Control Officer Deborah Simmons in her beige uniform. Her face fell when she recognized Shadow. "Frank," she said quietly as she approached. "What happened here?" Before Frank could answer, the businessman interrupted. "That dog attacked a kid. We all saw it. That's not what happened." Bill Henderson had finally found his voice. Stepping forward with his hands still shaking, "The boy ran into the street right in front of my truck. The dog pulled him back. I would have hit him otherwise." Deborah looked from Bill to Frank to Shadow, who was now sitting obediently despite his injuries. "Is that true?" "Frank, Shadow's trained to protect," Frank said, his weathered hand resting on the shepherd's head. "He saw the danger and acted. Then these people started beating him for it." A commotion at the edge of the crowd drew everyone's attention as a blonde woman pushed her way through, panic etched across her face. "Mason," Jessica Bennett broke through the circle, dropping to her knees beside her son. "Oh my God, Mason, are you hurt? What happened? Why is there blood? Mommy?" Mason reached for her, his tear-streaked face lighting up with relief. "The good doggy saved me from the truck." Jessica gathered him into her arms, her eyes wild as she took in the scene, the police, the paramedics, the injured German shepherd, the crowd of onlookers with makeshift weapons still in hand. "Ma'am, are you this child's mother?" Officer Wilson asked, approaching with notepad in hand. "Yes, I'm Jessica Bennett. I just got a call at work that Mason was—" She stopped, finally registering what her son had said. "Wait, saved him from what? From what I can piece together." Wilson said, "Your son was in the street about to be hit by that delivery truck." He gestured toward Bill's vehicle. "This dog apparently pulled him to safety." Jessica's face paled as she looked toward Shadow, taking in his bloodied form. "Then why is the dog injured?" "Because people thought he was attacking your boy," Frank said, his voice tight with anger. "They beat him while he was protecting your son." A heavy silence fell over the crowd as the implications sank in. Jessica hugged Mason tighter, her eyes filling with tears. "Who was watching him?" she asked. her voice barely above a whisper. "He was supposed to be with Caroline Peterson." Before anyone could respond, Deborah Simmons stepped forward with regret clear on her face. "Frank, I'm sorry, but I have to follow protocol. Any dog involved in an incident with a child needs to be quarantined for evaluation, regardless of circumstances." Frank stiffened. "He's injured. He needs a vet, not a cage. It's the law. Frank, you know that." Deborah wouldn't meet his eyes. After the Miller incident, the town council was very clear about the procedures. "This is different," Frank insisted. "Shadow saved that boy's life. These people are the ones who should be facing consequences." He gestured toward those who still held the improvised weapons they'd used on Shadow. Officer Wilson stepped between them. "Frank, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Shadow can get veterinary care, but then he needs to be evaluated." From the edge of the gathering, Sarah Miller pushed forward, press badge displayed prominently on her jacket. The local reporter had arrived just minutes after the police, alerted by a scanner in her car. "Officer Wilson," she called out, notepad already in hand. "Can you confirm reports that a German Shepherd attacked a child in the park?" Frank's face darkened. "That's not what happened. Are you people blind? Look at my dog. He's standing here bleeding because he saved that boy. And you're still calling him the aggressor." Sarah turned toward Frank, her pen poised. "Mr. Reynolds, witnesses describe your dog knocking down and grabbing a small child. Do you deny this happened?" "I deny your characterization," Frank shot back. "Shadow pulled that boy out of the path of a truck. Ask the driver." But when they turned to look for Bill Henderson, he had quietly slipped away during the commotion, his delivery truck no longer visible on the street. The one witness who could corroborate Frank's story was gone. "I have to take Shadow now." "Frank," Deborah said softly, approaching with a catch pole. "The sooner we get through the evaluation, the sooner you can have him back." Frank looked down at his faithful companion, torn between rage and despair. Shadow was losing blood, his once proud stance now diminished by pain and exhaustion. Fighting the authorities would only make things worse. "At least let me ride with him to the vet," Frank pleaded. "He's trained to respond to me. He'll be calmer." Deborah hesitated, then nodded. "We'll take him to Dr. Martinez first, then to the shelter." As they led Shadow toward the animal control van, Mason broke away from his mother and ran to the dog, wrapping his small arms around Shadow's neck once more. "Thank you, good doggy," he whispered into the shepherd's ear. For a brief moment, in the midst of all the confusion and injustice, Shadow's tail gave a single, weak wag. By nightfall, the incident at Maple Street Park had transformed from local disturbance to full-blown community controversy. Cell phone videos, each capturing only fragments of the event, circulated through text messages, Facebook groups, and the Riverdale Community Forum. Most began too late to show Mason in the street or Shadow's life-saving intervention. Instead, they showed only the German Shepherd standing over a crying child, then being struck by concerned citizens. In the sterile examination room of Riverdale Veterinary Clinic, Dr. Elena Martinez carefully cleaned Shadow's wounds while Frank stood nearby, his weathered hands clenched at his sides. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his face, deepening the lines of worry. 3 cracked ribs, Dr. Martinez reported, her voice tight with controlled anger. Laceration requiring 15 stitches on his flank. Contusion on his shoulder that's caused swelling around the joint. Multiple smaller cuts and bruises. She looked up at Frank, her dark eyes serious behind her glasses. He's lucky they didn't fracture his skull with whatever they hit him with. Frank nodded silently, watching as Shadow lay perfectly still on the examination table despite his obvious pain. The shepherd's eyes remained fixed on Frank, seeking reassurance. "Will he recover fully?" Frank finally asked, his voice rough with emotion. Dr. Martinez hesitated. "The physical injuries should heal with time and proper care. But Frank, I'm concerned about internal bleeding. That wound on his side is deep, and there's bruising around his abdomen that suggests possible organ damage. I'd like to keep him overnight for observation." Deborah Simmons stood by the door, official quarantine paperwork in hand. "I can give you until tomorrow morning. Frank, then I need to take him to the shelter for the mandatory evaluation period. This is wrong, and you know it," Frank said, not turning to look at her. "He's a hero, not a threat." "I don't make the laws, Frank, I just enforce them." Deborah's voice held genuine regret. "After what happened with the Miller boy, this isn't remotely the same situation." Frank turned now, anger flashing in his pale blue eyes. "That was a fighting dog with a history of aggression. Shadow is a trained service dog who saved a child's life today. And now he's being punished for it." Dr. Martinez intervened before the argument could escalate. "Deborah, in my professional opinion, moving this dog tomorrow could worsen his injuries. I'm recommending at least 72 hours of medical supervision before transport." Deborah frowned but nodded. "I'll note your medical recommendation in my report, but I'll need to post an officer outside. Protocol." "Fine," Frank muttered. "Post your officer. But Shadow stays here until he's stable." After Deborah left, Dr. Martinez placed a gentle hand on Frank's arm. "He's going to need round-the-clock monitoring. Why don't you go home, get some rest, and come back in the morning?" Frank shook his head. "I'm not leaving him." Dr. Martinez recognized the determination in the old veteran's eyes and didn't argue further. Instead, she brought a chair from her office and placed it next to the examination table where Shadow lay sedated and bandaged. "I'll bring you some coffee," she said softly, leaving Frank to his silent vigil. Across town, in the small 2-bedroom apartment she could barely afford, Jessica Bennett sat at her kitchen table staring at her laptop screen in disbelief. Mason was finally asleep after hours of excitement and questions about the good doggy that had saved him. Now, Jessica was trying to piece together what had actually happened. The Riverdale Community Forum was buzzing with posts about the vicious dog attack at the park. One thread, started by local busybody Margaret Collins, already had over 200 comments. "Dangerous German Shepherd attacks. Child in broad daylight. When will the town council take action on these dangerous breeds?" Jessica scrolled through the comments with growing horror. "I saw the whole thing. That dog knocked down a little boy and stood over him growling. That's Frank Reynolds' dog, the one he claims is a service animal, so he doesn't have to leash it. An accident waiting to happen. My sister's friend was there and said people had to beat the dog off the poor child." With shaking hands, Jessica typed a response. That poor child is my son Mason, and that dog saved his life today. Mason wandered into the street in front of a truck. The dog pulled him to safety. The people who attacked that animal are the ones who should be ashamed." She hit post, then leaned back in her chair, tears welling in her eyes. How had Mason ended up alone in the street? She'd trusted Caroline Peterson, who had apparently left her 4-year-old son unattended. When Jessica had called to confront her after the incident, Caroline had been defensive, insisting she'd only been gone a few minutes to help her sister. A new notification popped up on her screen. Someone had already responded to her comment, "Classic parent deflection. Your kid was unsupervised in a public park. You should be thanking those brave citizens who protected him from that animal." Jessica slammed her laptop closed, fighting the urge to scream. They didn't understand. Nobody understood. If that dog hadn't acted, Mason would be in a hospital now, or worse. Her phone buzzed with a text from her ex-husband. "Just saw the news about Mason. What the hell? Jess, I told you Riverdale wasn't safe." She ignored it, too exhausted for another argument about her parenting. Instead, she opened her browser and searched for Frank Reynolds Riverdale. She needed to thank the man whose dog had saved her son and perhaps find an ally in correcting the narrative that was rapidly spinning out of control. Frank dozed fitfully in the hard chair beside Shadow's bed, jerking awake at every whimper or movement from his dog. Around 3 a.m., his phone buzzed with a text from his neighbor, Edith Walters. "Frank, you need to see what they're saying on the Facebook group. It's not good. Call me when you can." With a weary sigh, Frank opened the Riverdale Community Facebook page. The top post was from Safe Riverdale, a group that had formed after the Miller incident. Emergency Town Hall meeting, Thursday 7 p.m. at Community Center to discuss dangerous dog incident and proposed amendments to Ordinance 24B. All concerned citizens should attend. Below the announcement was a blurry photo of Shadow standing over Mason, the angle making the protective stance look menacing. Frank's hands shook with anger as he scrolled through the comments, most calling for stricter regulations or outright bans on certain breeds. A soft knock at the door interrupted his dark thoughts. Martinez entered, looking as tired as Frank felt. "His vitals are stable, but I'm concerned about his breathing," she said, checking Shadow's IV line. "There's fluid building up in his lungs. I've started him on antibiotics and anti-inflammatories, but what?" Frank prompted when she hesitated. "Frank, I need to be honest with you. Shadow's injuries are severe. The next 72 hours will be critical, and even if he recovers physically—" She paused. "The town's climate right now isn't good. After what happened with the Miller boy, people are looking for someone to blame. They're afraid, so they blame an innocent dog who saved a child." Frank's voice rose, causing Shadow to stir restlessly. He immediately lowered his tone. "Elena, you've known me for 15 years. You've treated every service dog I've had. You know Shadow isn't dangerous." "I know that," she agreed. "But what matters is what the town council believes. And right now they're listening to the loudest voices, not the most informed ones." The following morning, Jessica dropped Mason off with Mrs. Abernathy. She'd called in sick to her diner job, unable to focus after the previous day's events, and drove to the Riverdale Veterinary Clinic. When she entered the waiting room, the receptionist looked up with surprise. "I'm here to see Frank Reynolds," Jessica explained. "My son is the boy his dog saved yesterday." The receptionist's expression softened. "He's in the back with Shadow. I'll let Dr. Martinez know you're here." Minutes later, Jessica was led to a small treatment room where Frank sat beside an examination table. Shadow lay on a thick blanket, various monitors attached to his body, his flank rising and falling with labored breaths. The sight of the bandaged dog made Jessica's throat tighten. "Mr. Reynolds," she said softly. "I'm Jessica Bennett, Mason's mom." Frank looked up, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He nodded once in acknowledgement but didn't speak. "I wanted to thank you," Jessica continued, moving closer. "Your dog saved my son's life. I don't know how to repay you for that." "You don't owe me anything," Frank replied, his voice gravelly. "Shadow was doing what he's trained to do." Jessica glanced at the injured shepherd. "How is he?" "Fighting." Frank reached out to gently stroke Shadow's head. "They beat him pretty badly." Jessica swallowed hard. "I've been trying to tell people what really happened. Online. But no one's listening. They all think he attacked Mason." "People see what they expect to see," Frank said bitterly. "After the Miller incident last spring, everyone in this town sees monsters in every dog bigger than a bread box." "Mason keeps asking about him," Jessica said. "He calls him the good doggy. He remembers what actually happened, even if no one believes him." For the first time, Frank's expression softened slightly. "Your boy okay? Just some scrapes and bruises." The paramedic said if Shadow hadn't pulled him back when he did. She couldn't finish the sentence, the possibility too horrible to voice. They sat in silence for a moment, united in their understanding of how differently yesterday could have ended. "There's a town meeting tomorrow night," Jessica finally said, "about the dangerous dog incident. I'm going to speak. Tell them what really happened." Frank nodded but didn't look optimistic. "They've already made up their minds." "Not if we can find proof." Jessica straightened her shoulders with new determination. "The truck driver, he saw everything. If we can find him—" "He took off," Frank interrupted. "Probably afraid of getting in trouble for nearly hitting your boy." "Then we'll find someone else who saw the whole thing. There must have been other witnesses." A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Martinez entered, clipboard in hand, her expression grave. "Frank, I've reviewed Shadow's latest tests. The internal bleeding has worsened. He's going to need surgery." She glanced at Jessica, then back to Frank. "It's risky in his condition, but without it—" Frank closed his eyes briefly, composing himself. "Do what you need to do." Dr. Martinez nodded. "We'll prep him right away." She turned to Jessica. "I'm sorry, but I need to ask you to leave now." As Jessica gathered her purse, she touched Frank's shoulder gently. "I'll do whatever I can to help. Mason and I owe Shadow that much." By Wednesday afternoon, the story had reached the local news. Sarah Miller, no relation to the boy who'd been attacked months earlier but equally eager for a sensational story, stood in front of Maple Street Park, delivering her report. "Behind me is where witnesses say a German shepherd belonging to Vietnam veteran Frank Reynolds attacked a 4-year-old boy yesterday morning. Quick-thinking bystanders intervened, driving the dog away from the child. While some claim the dog was actually saving the boy from an oncoming vehicle, authorities are taking no chances." The camera cut to a statement from Mayor Thompson, a silver-haired man with perpetually worried eyes. The safety of Riverdale's children is our highest priority. Until a full investigation is complete, the animal in question will remain in custody. Thursday's town hall meeting will address concerns about our current animal control ordinances. Jessica watched the news clip on her phone, seething with frustration. She'd called the station 3 times trying to give her side of the story, but they'd only used a brief sound bite that made it seem like she was grateful to the heroic bystanders. Her phone rang an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Mrs. Bennett? This is Bill Henderson from Riverdale Supply. I was driving the truck yesterday, at the park." Jessica's heart raced. "Mr. Henderson, I've been trying to find you. You saw what happened, right? You saw the dog save my son." There was a heavy pause. "Yes, ma'am. That's why I'm calling. I should have stayed yesterday, but I panicked. I was texting while driving. My daughter's in the hospital, and I was checking a message from her when your boy stepped into the street." Jessica absorbed this information, anger and gratitude battling within her. This man's distraction had nearly killed Mason, yet his testimony could save Shadow. "Mr. Henderson, there's a town meeting tomorrow night. They're talking about putting that dog down because people think he attacked my son. Would you be willing to tell what you really saw?" Another long pause. "I could lose my job, Mrs. Bennett. I've got a family to support, medical bills piling up." "Please," Jessica pressed. "That dog is dying from the injuries he received saving Mason. He doesn't deserve this." I'll think about it," Bill finally said. "That's all I can promise right now." After hanging up, Jessica sat motionless at her kitchen table, the weight of injustice pressing down on her. A text from Mrs. Abernathy reminded her to pick up Mason by 5. With a deep breath, she grabbed her keys and headed out, determination hardening within her. One way or another, she would set this right. In the surgical recovery room at Riverdale Veterinary Clinic, Frank sat vigil once more. Shadow lay unconscious, a tube helping him breathe, his shaved side revealing an angry red incision held closed with staples. Dr. Martinez had repaired a tear in his spleen and drained fluid from around his lungs, but warned Frank that the next 24 hours would be critical. "His body's been through a lot of trauma," she'd explained. "The surgery was successful, but now it's up to him to fight." Frank leaned closer to his dog, speaking in the low, steady voice he'd used throughout their years together. "You hang in there, buddy. We've got more work to do. You and me. This town needs reminding what a real hero looks like." Shadow's ear twitched slightly at the sound of his master's voice, but he remained unconscious, fighting a battle Frank couldn't help him with. Outside the clinic, a small crowd had gathered. Some held signs reading "Justice for Shadow" and "He saved a life." But others carried different messages: "Protect our children" and "Ban dangerous dogs." The division in Riverdale was growing deeper by the hour. Edith Walters pushed through the crowd with a determination belying her 84 years, her silver hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. The clinic receptionist tried to stop her, but Edith waved her away. "I've known Frank Reynolds since he was in diapers," she declared. "I'm going back there, and you can call the police if you want to try and stop me." Moments later, she entered the recovery room, taking in the scene with wise, sad eyes. Without a word, She placed a weathered hand on Frank's shoulder and stood beside him, sharing his vigil in silence. After some time, she spoke. "I've been making some calls. Frank. People who were there. People who saw what really happened. Not everyone in this town has lost their common sense." Frank looked up at her, a faint hope kindling in his tired eyes. "Tomorrow, at that meeting," Edith continued, "you won't be standing alone. I promise you that." As if in response, Shadow's tail moved almost imperceptibly against the blanket, the smallest sign of life and fight in a dog who had given everything to save a child, only to be condemned for it by the very community he had served. Thursday evening arrived with a summer storm brewing on the horizon, dark clouds gathering above Riverdale like an omen. The community center parking lot filled quickly as residents arrived for the emergency town hall meeting, their faces somber or animated depending on which side of the controversy they supported. News vans from the regional stations had parked along the street, sensing a story that might appeal beyond the boundaries of the small town. Frank hadn't wanted to leave Shadow's side, but Dr. Martinez had insisted. "He's stable for now," she'd told him that afternoon. "The surgery went as well as could be expected. But Frank, if you don't go to that meeting, who will speak for him?" So he'd showered, shaved, and put on the only suit he owned, the one he wore to veterans' funerals and his son Michael's memorial service each year. The navy blue fabric hung looser on his frame than it once had, but the military precision of his appearance remained intact. Respect often began with presentation. Frank had learned that lesson decades ago. Inside the community center, the usual monthly meeting space had been expanded to accommodate the overflow crowd. Folding chairs filled the hardwood floor where community yoga classes were normally held. The mayor and town council members sat at a long table on the small stage, shuffling papers and whispering among themselves. A podium with a microphone stood to one side, ready for public comments. Frank entered alone, the sudden hush and turned heads making it clear his arrival had been noted. He scanned the room, recognizing most faces. Riverdale wasn't large enough for anonymity. Some nodded respectfully, others averted their eyes or whispered behind cupped hands. A few wore T-shirts hastily printed with Safe Riverdale logos, while others sported blue ribbons that Frank didn't recognize. He chose a seat in the back, unwilling to be the center of attention until it was time to speak. A moment later, the seat beside him was taken by Edith Walters, immaculately dressed in a floral blouse and pearls. "You clean up nice, Frank," she said, patting his arm. "Don't you worry. We've got some surprises tonight." Before he could ask what she meant, Mayor Thompson approached the podium, tapping the microphone to signal the start of the meeting. "Good evening, Riverdale," he began, his politician's smile not quite reaching his eyes. "We've called this emergency session to address concerns raised by Tuesday's incident at Maple Street Park and to discuss potential amendments to Ordinance 24B regarding dangerous animals within town limits." Frank tensed, already bristling at the characterization of Shadow as dangerous. Edith's hand on his arm reminded him to keep his composure. "Before we open the floor for public comment," the mayor continued, "I'd like to recognize Margaret Collins from the Safe Riverdale Initiative for a brief presentation." Margaret Collins, a tall woman in her 50s with a perpetually pinched expression, strode to the podium with the confidence of someone who believed absolutely in her own righteousness. She clicked a remote, and the projection screen behind her lit up with the now familiar blurry image of Shadow standing over Mason. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're looking at is the moment a child's life was endangered by an unleashed, aggressive animal," Margaret began, her voice carrying easily without the microphone. "This is the third incident involving large breed dogs in our community this year. The attack on Jeremy Miller required 27 stitches and has left a 10-year-old boy traumatized." A murmur ran through the crowd. Frank's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "We propose amendments to Ordinance 24B that would ban certain breeds entirely from Riverdale city limits, require muzzles for all dogs over 50 pounds in public spaces, and implement a 3-strike rule where any dog involved in multiple incidents would be humanely euthanized." Margaret clicked to the next slide, displaying a list of breeds including German Shepherds, Rottweilers, and Pit Bulls. "Furthermore, we believe the animal involved in Tuesday's incident should be classified as dangerous and dealt with accordingly, regardless of its owner's military status or claims about service training." Frank couldn't contain himself any longer. "That's a damned lie," he called out, rising to his feet. "Shadow saved that boy's life." Mayor Thompson gavelled for order. "Mr. Reynolds, you'll have your turn to speak. Please show respect for our process." "Respect." Frank's voice rose. "Where's the respect for the truth? Where's the respect for a dog who's lying in a clinic right now because he pulled a child from the path of a truck and got beaten half to death for it?" The crowd erupted into competing voices, some supporting Frank, others calling for him to be removed. Through the chaos, the community center doors opened, and Jessica Bennett entered with Mason holding her hand. Behind them came a small procession including Dr. Martinez and, to Frank's surprise, Bill Henderson in his delivery uniform. "Mayor Thompson," Jessica called out, her voice cutting through the noise, "before you vote on anything, I think you should hear from everyone who was actually there." The mayor, sensing the volatile mood of the room, gavelled again for order. "Mrs. Bennett, we welcome your input during the public comment period, but we have a procedure." "With all due respect, Mayor," interrupted Sheriff Wilson, who had been standing quietly by the wall. "Given the seriousness of what's being proposed, it might be best to hear from the witnesses now." Thompson hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Very well. Mrs. Bennett, as the mother of the child involved, you may speak first." Jessica approached the podium, lifting Mason so he could see over it. The little boy's eyes widened at the crowd, but he didn't seem frightened. "My name is Jessica Bennett, and this is my son, Mason," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. On Tuesday morning, Mason was supposed to be under adult supervision at Carolyn Peterson's house, but he was left alone and wandered away. He followed an ice cream truck toward the park and tried to cross Maple Street. She paused, taking a deep breath. What happened next wasn't an attack. Frank Reynolds' dog Shadow saw what no human noticed. My son was about to be hit by a delivery truck. Shadow ran to Mason and pulled him back from the street just before the truck would have struck him. He saved my son's life. Murmurs rippled through the crowd again. But Jessica wasn't finished. The people who attacked Shadow didn't see what happened. They only saw a large dog and a crying child, and they assumed the worst. They beat an innocent animal who was trying to protect my son. Jessica's voice broke slightly. Mason has asked about the good doggy every day since. He knows who saved him. Even if this town doesn't. She stepped back from the podium, and Sheriff Wilson approached next. "Folks, I've reviewed all the evidence, including statements from multiple witnesses. While initial reports characterize this as an attack, further investigation has revealed a different story." The sheriff nodded toward Bill Henderson, who stood nervously by the door. "Mr. Henderson has provided a statement confirming that the child was in the street and would have been struck by his delivery truck if not for the dog's intervention." Bill stepped forward, his cap in his hands. "It's true," he said, his voice barely reaching the back of the room. I was looking at my phone, checking a message about my daughter in the hospital. I didn't see the boy until it was almost too late. That dog pulled him back just in time. I would have hit him otherwise." The admission sent another wave of whispers through the room. Margaret Collins leaned toward the mayor, speaking urgently in his ear, but he waved her off. "Dr. Martinez," the sheriff continued, "can you tell us about Shadow's condition?" The veterinarian stepped to the podium next, her clinical white coat lending authority to her words. Shadow sustained multiple severe injuries from the beating he received, including cracked ribs, a lacerated spleen, and numerous contusions. He required emergency surgery yesterday and remains in critical condition. She looked directly at the town council. "In my professional opinion, having treated this animal for the past 3 years, Shadow poses absolutely no threat to the community. His actions on Tuesday were consistent with his training as a service dog with specialized skills in protection and threat assessment." Margaret Collins pushed her way back to the microphone. "With all due respect, Dr. Martinez, one incident of seemingly good behavior doesn't negate the inherent danger of these breeds. The fact remains that powerful dogs are unpredictable. And, oh, Horsepucky." The exclamation came from Edith Walters, who had risen from her seat with surprising agility for her age. The crowd parted as she marched toward the podium, her small frame vibrating with indignation. "I've lived in this town for 84 years, and I've never heard such nonsense in all my days." She reached the podium and adjusted the microphone to her height. "I was there on Tuesday. I saw that dog with Frank in the morning." Calm as could be. The only ones who were dangerous that day were the humans who beat an animal for doing exactly what we've trained dogs to do for thousands of years: protect the vulnerable. Edith looked around the room, making eye contact with faces she'd known for decades. When did we become a town that attacks first and asks questions later? When did we start to fear the very creatures we've invited into our homes and hearts? I'm ashamed of what happened on Tuesday. And you all should be too." The silence that followed was broken by a small voice. Mason had wiggled free from his mother's grasp and approached the microphone. "The good doggy saved me," he said simply, his voice amplified to fill the room. "The truck was coming, and he pulled me back. Then people hurt him." His lower lip trembled. Why did they hurt the good doggy? Not even Margaret Collins had a response to that. Frank rose slowly and walked to the front of the room, stopping beside Mason. He knelt down, bringing himself to the boy's eye level despite the protest from his bad knee. "Some people were scared," he explained gently. "They didn't understand what Shadow was doing." "Is the good doggy going to be okay?" Mason asked, his eyes wide with concern. Frank hesitated, unwilling to lie to the child. "I hope so, buddy. He's very sick right now, but he's fighting hard." Mason nodded solemnly. "I want to see him." to say thank you. Maybe when he's feeling better, Frank said, his voice rough with emotion. Mayor Thompson cleared his throat, clearly affected by the exchange. I think we've heard enough to reconsider the proposed amendments, he said. Perhaps a committee should be formed to study the issue further, with input from veterinary professionals and dog training experts. Margaret Collins began to protest, but the mayor continued. Furthermore, I see no reason for the dog in question to remain in custody once it has recovered sufficiently. Sheriff Wilson, please work with animal control to release Shadow back to Mr. Reynolds' care as soon as medically advisable. A cheer went up from many in the crowd, while others sat with arms crossed, clearly displeased with the outcome. Frank stood slowly, nodding his thanks to the mayor. As the meeting began to break up, Frank felt a tug on his sleeve. Jessica stood there, Mason at her side. Mr. Reynolds, would you like a ride back to the clinic? I know you must be anxious to get back to Shadow. Before Frank could answer, his phone rang. The room fell oddly quiet as he answered it, everyone somehow sensing the importance of the call. Frank, it's Elena, came Dr. Martinez's voice, and something in her tone made his blood run cold. You need to get back here right away. Shadow's taken a turn for the worse. His temperature is spiking, and he's struggling to breathe. I think we're losing him. Frank's face drained of color as he lowered the phone. I need to go now, he said, his voice barely audible. Shadow's dying. The drive from the community center to Riverdale Veterinary Clinic took only 8 minutes. But to Frank, it felt like hours. Jessica drove with both hands gripping the steering wheel, navigating the evening traffic with controlled urgency. In the back seat, Mason sat quietly, sensing the gravity of the situation, even if he didn't fully understand it. Frank stared straight ahead, his weathered face a mask of stoicism that barely contained the storm beneath. He's tough, Jessica said, breaking the heavy silence. Dr. Martinez said the surgery went well. Frank nodded once, but didn't speak. Words seemed inadequate against the fear that gripped him. Shadow wasn't just a dog to him. He was the reason Frank had found purpose after losing his son, the companion who had pulled him back from the edge of despair when the nightmares and memories became too much. Now, because Shadow had done exactly what he was trained to do, protect the vulnerable, he might lose him too. The clinic parking lot was nearly empty when they arrived. Frank was out of the car before Jessica had fully stopped, moving with a speed that belied his age and bad knee. He pushed through the front doors to find Dr. Martinez waiting for him, her surgical mask hanging loose around her neck, dark circles under her eyes. What happened? Frank demanded, scanning her face for answers. Septic shock, she replied, already leading him through the back hallway toward the intensive care unit. The infection spread faster than the antibiotics could control it. His temperature spiked to 106, and his blood pressure dropped dangerously low. We're doing everything we can, Frank. But his body has been through so much trauma. They reached the ICU, a small room with 3 kennels equipped with monitoring equipment. Shadow occupied the largest one, his powerful body now appearing diminished against the white bedding. IV lines ran into his front leg, and an oxygen mask covered his muzzle. The monitors beeped with an irregular rhythm that even Frank knew wasn't good. "Can I touch him?" Frank asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Doctor?" Martinez nodded. "Talk to him. Let him know you're here." Frank approached slowly, lowering himself to his knees beside the kennel despite the pain it caused. He reached through the bars to place his hand gently on Shadow's head, careful to avoid the bandages. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "I'm here now. You did good. Shadow? Real good." Shadow's eyes flickered open at the sound of his master's voice, but they were glazed with fever and pain. His tail twitched weakly against the bedding, the barest acknowledgement. "The whole town knows what you did now," Frank continued, stroking the fur between Shadow's ears the way he knew the dog liked. "That little boy is safe because of you. You saved him, just like you were trained to do." Behind him, Frank heard the clinic doors open again and the sound of quiet footsteps. Jessica and Mason had followed him in, hanging back respectfully near the entrance to the ICU. The vet called in a specialist from Capital City. Dr. Martinez explained quietly to Jessica, "He's on his way, but it might be too late. The infection has overwhelmed his system." Mason tugged at his mother's hand. His small face crumpled with concern. "Is the good doggy going to heaven like Grandpa?" he asked, loud enough for Frank to hear. The question hung in the air, sharp and painful. Frank closed his eyes briefly, fighting for composure. When he opened them again, he saw Shadow watching him with that steady gaze that had always seemed to understand more than any animal should. "Not yet," Frank said firmly, as much to Shadow as to the boy. "He's not done here yet." But even as he spoke, one of the monitors began to alarm. Shadow's breathing became more labored, each breath a visible struggle. "Doctor?" Martinez moved quickly to the kennel, checking the monitors and adjusting the oxygen flow. "His oxygen saturation is dropping," she said, the professional calm in her voice beginning to crack. "Frank, I need to be honest with you. We're losing him." Frank felt the world narrow to this single moment, this single heartbeat. All the losses of his life, his platoon members in Vietnam, his wife to cancer, his son to a drunk driver seemed to converge into this one imminent loss. He couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only keep his hand on Shadow's head as if the connection between them might somehow be enough to tether the dog to life. "Mr. Frank," a small voice broke through his grief. Mason had approached and now stood beside him, looking at Shadow with solemn eyes. "Can I say thank you to the good doggy before he goes to heaven?" Frank looked at the boy, so earnest and unaware of social boundaries in the way only children can be. He nodded once and shifted slightly to make room. Mason came closer, his small hand reaching tentatively toward Shadow's fur. "Thank you for saving me from the truck. Good doggy," he said quietly. "You're the bravest doggy ever." Shadow's ear twitched at the sound of the child's voice, and with what seemed like tremendous effort, his eyes focused on Mason. The monitor's alarming beep continued, but for that moment, Shadow's attention was fully on the boy he had saved. "He remembers you," Frank said, his voice rough with emotion. Mason nodded seriously. "I was scared of the truck, but he pushed me away fast. Then everybody was yelling and hitting him." His lower lip trembled. "I tried to tell them he was good, but nobody listened." "I know, buddy," Frank said. "Grown-ups don't always listen when they should." Shadow's breathing grew more labored, the rise and fall of his chest increasingly irregular. "Doctor, Martinez checked the monitors again, her expression grave. "Frank, I think it's time to consider—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Frank understood. The decision no pet owner ever wants to make to end suffering when hope is gone. "No," he said firmly. "Not yet. He deserves a chance to fight." As if in response to his master's determination, Shadow suddenly raised his head slightly, his eyes focusing with unexpected clarity. The monitor's alarm changed tone as his heart rate spiked. "He's trying to get up," Dr. Martinez said with surprise, moving to gently restrain the dog. "Frank, he shouldn't be moving. The strain could—" But Shadow wasn't trying to stand. Instead, his gaze had locked onto something near the clinic entrance. Frank turned to see what had caught the dog's attention. Jessica stood there, her phone in hand, watching the scene with tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to intrude. I needed everyone to know what really happened." She held up her phone, showing a social media live stream in progress. The comments were scrolling past, rapidly dozens, then hundreds of people watching Shadow's struggle in real time. "People need to see what their rush to judgment has done," Jessica explained. "The whole town should witness this." Frank's first instinct was anger at this invasion of a private moment. But as he looked back at Shadow, he realized the dog had calmed somewhat. His breathing, while still labored, had found a more regular rhythm. The monitor's alarm had quieted. "I think he's stabilizing," Dr. Martinez said with cautious surprise, checking the readings. "His oxygen levels are improving slightly." Mason, oblivious to the medical details, had placed his small hand on Shadow's paw. "Don't go to heaven yet," he said seriously. "My mommy says I need to draw you a thank you picture first." Something in the simple, childish statement seemed to reach Shadow. His tail thumped once against the bedding, a ghost of his usual enthusiastic wag. The clinic doors burst open again, and a man in surgical scrubs rushed in, carrying a medical bag. "I'm Dr. Patel from Capital City Animal Hospital," he announced, slightly out of breath. "Drove as fast as I could. Where's our patient?" Dr. Martinez quickly briefed him on Shadow's condition while Frank continued his silent vigil beside the kennel. The new doctor examined Shadow, reviewed his charts, and conferred quietly with Dr. Martinez. "It's touch and go," Dr. Patel finally said to Frank. "But if we can get the infection under control, he has a chance. German Shepherds are fighters by nature." "This one more than most," Frank replied. As the doctors prepared a new treatment protocol, Frank became aware of the phone in Jessica's hand again. The comments were still streaming in on her live video, but now they were different. People were offering prayers, expressing outrage at what had happened to Shadow, and sharing their own stories of dogs who had protected children. And in that moment, as Shadow fought for his life with a little boy's hand on his paw, something shifted in Riverdale. The narrative that had been building of dangerous dogs and necessary restrictions began to crumble against the reality of what they were witnessing, the bond between a faithful animal and the humans he had sworn, in his dog's heart, to protect. But Shadow's fight was far from over. His breathing remained labored, his body weakened by trauma and infection. As night fell over Riverdale, the vigil at the veterinary clinic continued, with Frank refusing to leave his companion's side, while somewhere in the darkness, a community began to reckon with its hasty judgment and the cost it might exact on an innocent hero. Dawn broke over Riverdale with the gentle persistence that only small-town mornings seemed to possess. The storm that had threatened the previous evening had passed in the night, leaving behind washed streets and clear skies. At Riverdale Veterinary Clinic, the overnight staff moved quietly around Frank, who had refused to leave and now dozed uncomfortably in a chair beside Shadow's kennel, his hand still resting on the German shepherd's flank. Dr. Martinez had gone home around midnight after Dr. Patel assured her he would monitor Shadow through the night. Now she returned, coffee in hand, to find Frank in the same position she'd left him in. "Frank," she said softly, touching his shoulder. "Frank, wake up." He stirred immediately, decades of military training making deep sleep impossible even now. "Shadow." His voice was rough with exhaustion. His fever broke around 4 this morning. Dr. Martinez said, a cautious smile softening her tired features. "His vitals have been stable for the past 3 hours." Frank straightened, wincing at the stiffness in his back and knee. "He's going to make it. Dr. Patel thinks the worst is past. The new antibiotic cocktail seems to be working." She handed him the coffee. "It's still touch and go, but Shadow's fighting hard." Frank looked at his dog, noting the more regular rise and fall of Shadow's chest and the slightly improved color of his gums. The oxygen mask had been replaced with a nasal cannula, a sign that his breathing had strengthened. "Tough old soldier," Frank murmured, gently stroking Shadow's ear. The shepherd's tail thumped weakly against the bedding in response, his eyes opening briefly to find his master before drifting closed again. The clinic's front door chimed, and Dr. Martinez excused herself to check on the early arrival. Frank continued his quiet communion with Shadow, speaking softly about nothing in particular, the sound of his voice seeming to soothe the injured dog. "Mr. Reynolds," Dr. Martinez had returned, looking slightly bemused. "There are some people here to see you. Actually, quite a few people." Frank frowned, not wanting to leave Shadow's side. "Tell them to come back later." "I think you might want to see this," she insisted gently. "You can come right back to Shadow. He's stable for now." Reluctantly, Frank rose and followed her to the clinic's front windows. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. The parking lot, empty the night before, was now filled with people, at least 30 or 40 of them, standing quietly in the early morning light. Some held signs, "Thank you, Shadow," and "Riverdale stands with heroes," and "We're sorry." Others had brought flowers or dog toys, creating a small memorial near the clinic entrance. "What in the world?" Frank murmured, taken aback by the display. Dr. Martinez handed him her tablet. Open to the Riverdale Community Forum, the top post with over 1,000 comments, was Jessica's live stream from the night before, showing Shadow's struggle and Frank's vigil. Below it were dozens of messages of support, apologies, and calls for justice. Jessica's video went viral overnight. Dr. Martinez explained. It was picked up by the regional news stations. People are calling Shadow a hero. Frank stared at the screen, then back at the gathering outside. He recognized faces in the crowd, neighbors who had never spoken to him before, parents from the school near his home, even a few of the people who had been wearing Safe Riverdale t-shirts at the town meeting. "They want to know how he's doing," Dr. Martinez said. "Some of them have been here since sunrise." Frank shook his head, overwhelmed by the sudden shift. Just days ago, these same people had been ready to condemn Shadow as dangerous. The clinic door opened again, and Sheriff Wilson entered, removing his hat as he approached Frank. "Morning, Frank. Heard Shadow had a rough night. How's he doing?" "Better," Frank replied cautiously. "What brings you by so early?" "James." The sheriff glanced toward the back of the clinic where Shadow was being kept. "Few things. First, I wanted to let you know that we've completed our investigation of the incident. Shadow's been officially cleared of any wrongdoing. The quarantine order has been lifted." Frank nodded, unsurprised by this development after the revelations at the town meeting. "And," Sheriff Wilson shifted uncomfortably, "and I've been reviewing the eyewitness statements about what happened after Shadow saved the Bennett boy. Several people have come forward with videos showing the assault on your dog." "Assault," Frank repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. "That's what it was, wasn't it? They beat him half to death for saving a child?" "Yes," the sheriff agreed grimly. "And while I understand emotions were running high, that doesn't excuse what happened. I'm prepared to file charges against the primary aggressors if that's what you want." Frank considered this for a long moment, thinking of Shadow fighting for his life in the back room, of the surgeries and pain he'd endured. Part of him, the part still raw with anger, wanted justice, wanted those responsible to face consequences. But another part of him looked out at the crowd gathered in support, at the genuine remorse on their faces, and wondered what purpose such charges would really serve. "What do you think, James?" Frank finally asked. "You've been sheriff here for what, 15 years? What does this town need right now?" Sheriff Wilson sighed, turning his hat in his hands. "Honestly, I think this town needs healing more than it needs more division. What happened to Shadow was wrong, but it came from a place of fear, not malice. Those people thought they were protecting a child." Frank nodded slowly. "Let me think about it. Right now, my priority is getting Shadow well enough to come home." As they spoke, a familiar sedan pulled into the parking lot, navigating carefully through the crowd. Jessica Bennett emerged with Mason in tow, the little boy clutching a large piece of construction paper. "Looks like you've got more visitors," Sheriff Wilson observed. "I'll check back with you tomorrow. Frank, give that brave dog of yours my best." Jessica approached hesitantly, seeming surprised by the gathering outside. "I didn't expect all this," she said as she entered the clinic. "Is it okay that we came? Mason wanted to bring something for Shadow." Mason held up his artwork proudly, a child's drawing of a large black and tan dog, standing beside a small blond boy, both surrounded by a lopsided heart. "I made this for the good doggy," he announced, "to help him feel better." Despite his exhaustion and worry, Frank felt a smile tug at his lips. "I'm sure he'll like that very much. Mason, would you like to see him? He's still pretty sick, but he's doing better today." Mason nodded eagerly, and Frank led them back to the ICU. Shadow had awakened fully now and lifted his head slightly as they entered, his ears perking forward with interest. "Good doggy," Mason exclaimed, rushing forward only to be gently restrained by his mother. "Careful, honey," Jessica cautioned. "Remember what we talked about. Shadow is very hurt and needs to rest." Mason nodded solemnly. Approaching more slowly, Frank lifted him so he could see into the kennel properly. "You can pet him very gently on his head," Frank instructed. "That's a safe place to touch him." With exaggerated care, Mason reached out to stroke Shadow's head, I brought you a picture, he told the dog seriously. Mommy says we can hang it in your house when you go home. Shadow's tail thumped against the bedding, his eyes clearer now than they had been the night before, fixed on the boy's face. Dr. Patel entered, clipboard in hand, and nodded approvingly at Shadow's alert demeanor. He's responding well to treatment, he told Frank. If he continues like this, we might be able to consider releasing him in a few days, with strict home care instructions. Of course. Home, Frank repeated, the word carrying weight beyond its single syllable. Shadow had been part of making his house a home again after years of emptiness following his son's death. I have some other news you might want to hear, Dr. Martinez said, joining them. She held out her tablet again, this time displaying an email. The American Humane Association caught wind of Shadow's story. They want to honor him with their Hero Dog Award. And there's more a national German Shepherd rescue organization is offering to cover all of Shadow's medical expenses. Frank stared at the tablet, momentarily speechless. Why would they do that? Because people respond to heroes, Jessica said quietly. And to redemption stories. What happened to Shadow was terrible. But how the town is responding now, that's the story people are connecting with. As if to underscore her point, the door to the clinic opened again, and Margaret Collins entered hesitantly. The sight of the safe Riverdale leader caused an immediate tension in the room. She clutched her purse tightly, her usual confidence notably absent. Mr. Reynolds, she began stiffly. I've come to... That is... She seemed to struggle with the words before straightening her shoulders. I've come to apologize. To you. And to Shadow. Frank regarded her silently, waiting. I was wrong, Margaret continued, about Shadow, about what happened that day, and about the approach our group has been taking to dog safety in town. She glanced toward Shadow in his kennel. The video Mrs. Bennett shared last night, seeing what that dog went through after saving a child. It made me reconsider some things. She reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope. This is from the Safe Riverdale members. It's not much, but we'd like to contribute to Shadow's medical care and recovery. Frank didn't reach for the envelope immediately. This isn't about money, Mrs. Collins. I know, she acknowledged. It's about making amends, about admitting when we've been wrong. She hesitated, then added, The Safe Riverdale group met this morning. We've decided to rebrand as Riverdale Responsible Pet Owners. We'd like to focus on education rather than restriction, teaching children how to approach dogs safely. Promoting responsible ownership practices, that sort of thing. She glanced at Mason, who was still petting Shadow gently. Perhaps when he's recovered, Shadow might even help with some demonstrations. Show children what a well-trained dog looks like. The suggestion was so unexpected that Frank found himself without a ready response. Dr. Martinez stepped in smoothly, accepting the envelope. I'm sure Frank will consider it when Shadow is feeling better. Right now, his focus is on recovery. Margaret nodded, understanding the polite dismissal. Of course. Please, just let everyone know how he's doing. The whole town is pulling for him now. After she left, Frank sank back into his chair beside Shadow's kennel. suddenly overwhelmed by the rapid shift in circumstances. "Quite a turnaround," he muttered. "People can change when they see the truth," Jessica observed, sitting beside him with Mason in her lap, "especially when that truth comes with undeniable evidence." Outside the clinic windows, the crowd had continued to grow. Local news vans had arrived, and reporters were interviewing people in the parking lot. Sheriff Wilson had returned and was helping to organize the gathering to ensure the clinic's regular business wasn't disrupted. And at the center of it all, unaware of his newfound celebrity, Shadow rested more peacefully than he had in days, his body finally beginning the long journey toward healing, with Mason's colorful drawing taped to the wall of his kennel, a simple testament to the life he had saved and the hearts he had changed. 1 year later, Maple Street Park bustled with activity under a perfect June sky. Colorful banners stretched between the oak trees, proclaiming First Annual Shadow Day in bold letters. Children raced across the grass, many wearing paper dog ears or T-shirts featuring a stylized silhouette of a German Shepherd. At the center of the park, a small bronze statue had been erected, a German Shepherd standing protectively beside a small boy, its base inscribed with the simple words, "For Shadow, who reminded Riverdale what heroism truly means." Frank Reynolds sat on his usual bench, watching the festivities with quiet satisfaction. Shadow lay at his feet, his coat once again glossy and full, though a faint scar remained visible along his flank where the worst of his injuries had been. The shepherd wore a special blue vest with therapy dog and canine hero patches prominently displayed. "Never thought I'd see the day," Edith Walters remarked, settling onto the bench beside Frank. At 85, she moved a bit slower but remained as sharp-tongued as ever. "This town giving a celebration for a dog they nearly killed a year ago." Frank smiled at his old friend. "People change, Edith. Sometimes they just need a reason to." "Some faster than others," she agreed, watching as Margaret Collins directed volunteers at the dog safety education booth nearby. The former leader of Safe Riverdale had become one of Shadow's most vocal advocates, channeling her organizational energy into positive educational initiatives rather than restrictive legislation. Across the park, Jessica Bennett helped distribute cupcakes decorated with paw prints, while Mason, now 5 and considerably taller, proudly led children to meet Shadow in small supervised groups. The boy had appointed himself Shadow's unofficial ambassador, solemnly explaining to anyone who would listen how the good doggy had saved him from the truck. The past year had brought many changes to Riverdale. Ordinance 24B had been revised to focus on responsible ownership rather than breed restrictions. The town had established a training scholarship program for owners of large dogs, and Shadow, once he had fully recovered, had become a regular visitor to local schools, helping teach children about canine body language and safe interaction with dogs. Frank's life had changed too. The national attention Shadow's story received had connected him with other veterans using service dogs to cope with PTSD. He now ran a small program helping match rescued dogs with veterans in need, operating out of the renovated garage behind his home. Frank Shadow. Mason called, running toward them with a group of children in tow. "Can Shadow show the new kids the gentle handshake trick?" Frank nodded, giving Shadow the subtle hand signal that indicated it was time to work. The German Shepherd sat up attentively, his intelligent eyes focused on the approaching children. "Remember what I told you," Mason instructed his friends importantly. "Hold your hand out flat like this, and wait for Shadow to come to you. Don't grab or reach over his head." The children followed his instructions with varying degrees of success, giggling as Shadow gently placed his paw in each outstretched hand in turn. Frank watched with pride. The therapy training they'd completed together had given Shadow a new purpose, transforming the trauma of his experience into something positive. "He's a natural with the kids," observed Sheriff Wilson, who had wandered over to witness the demonstration. "Hard to believe anyone ever thought he was dangerous." "Fear makes people see threats where there aren't any," Frank replied, "and makes them miss the real dangers right in front of them." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "Bill Henderson's community service program is going well. By the way, his presentations on distracted driving have been pretty powerful." Nothing like someone who nearly killed a child telling the story to make people think twice about checking their phones behind the wheel. Frank glanced across the park to where Bill stood beside a display about driver safety, his delivery company uniform replaced with casual clothes. His daughter Emily, now fully recovered from her appendix surgery, helping distribute pamphlets. "People deserve second chances," Frank said. "Shadow taught me that." As the afternoon progressed, Mayor Thompson called everyone to gather near the new statue for the official dedication ceremony. Frank made his way to the front, Shadow walking perfectly at heel beside him despite the excitement and crowds. "1 year ago, our community witnessed something extraordinary," the mayor began. "A dog named Shadow saved a child from certain harm, and in doing so, held a mirror up to Riverdale itself. What we saw in that reflection wasn't always flattering. We saw how quick we were to judge, how easily fear could override reason, how vulnerable we were to seeing exactly what we expected to see, rather than what was actually happening." The crowd listened in respectful silence, many nodding in acknowledgement of these uncomfortable truths. But Shadow's story didn't end there. Mayor Thompson continued. His courage in the face of injustice, his loyalty despite suffering, and his ultimate forgiveness showed us a better path forward. This statue stands not just to honor one heroic dog, but to remind all of us that heroism often comes from unexpected places, and that redemption is always possible when we have the courage to admit our mistakes and make amends. Jessica stepped forward with Mason, who carried a small brass plaque. "Mason has something he'd like to add to the memorial," she explained. The boy carefully placed the plaque at the base of the statue. It read, "The good doggy saved me when no one else could. Thank you, Shadow. Love, Mason." The simplicity of the message brought tears to many eyes in the crowd. Frank felt his own vision blur as he knelt beside Shadow, wrapping one arm around the shepherd's powerful shoulders. "You've done good, buddy," he whispered. "Real good." Shadow leaned against him, warm and solid and alive, a constant reminder that sometimes the most profound love comes with fur and 4 paws, asking nothing in return but the chance to be loyal to the end. As the ceremony concluded and people dispersed to enjoy the remaining festivities, Edith Walters approached Frank once more, her wise old eyes twinkling. "You know what I think, Frank," she said, watching as Shadow patiently allowed a group of children to pet him. "I think your Michael would be mighty proud of what you and Shadow have accomplished here." Frank nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in his throat. In saving Mason, Shadow had saved something in Frank, too, had reminded him that even after unbearable loss, The heart can find new ways to matter, new souls to protect, new purpose in the simple act of caring deeply for another living being. And in that moment, with Shadow beside him, and a community transformed by one dog's courage, Frank Reynolds felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, a sense of peace, hard-won and complete. In Shadow's story, we find echoes of our own journey through these later years of life. How many times have we been misjudged, overlooked, or dismissed because of gray hair or slower steps? Like Shadow, we know what it means to have wisdom that goes unseen, to be loyal beyond reason, to protect what matters despite the personal cost. We've witnessed how quickly society rushes to judgment, how painful it is when our lifetime of character is reduced to a single moment's perception. But Shadow reminds us that it's never too late for truth to prevail, for communities to heal, for purpose to find us again. Many of us have felt the emptiness of Frank's quiet house, known the grief of outliving those we thought we'd grow old beside. Yet, in that German shepherd's unwavering devotion, we recognize our own capacity to begin again, to form new bonds that matter profoundly. We understand Frank's need to be needed, to still make a difference in this world.